Warning, this footage contains explicit advanced cloud chasing builds. Do not attempt these type of builds without understanding safety precautions involving voltages, currents, resistance, and Ohm's law. Viewer discretion is advised.
A standard pair of bent tip needle nose pliers, regular wire cutters, ceramic tweezers, nylon tip pliers, and a 1/8 screwdriver, or a 1/8 bit would work too. And what we're gonna build today is the framed staple coil. 8 pieces, 0.5 ribbon for the core. We're gonna frame it with 26 gauge. And then the outer clapped-in wraps is going to be 38 gauge. So everything will be nichrome except for the cores, which is 0.5 ribbon canthal. I've already got some pre-straightened out here, but basically you want to cut 8 equal length pieces of your 0.5 ribbon. I'll cut one for you here and show you how that works. I just usually, careful when I pull it off the spool, you want to keep it as straight as possible. It gets really tricky to stack if you have kinks and weird stuff in it like that. So I just kind of let it fall off the spool, lay it on the table like this, and I cut one by one. And I cut the second and third and so on. Just gauge it off the first one that I cut. It doesn't matter if they're exactly the same. You can always trim them afterwards. The closer they are to start off, the better. So. Got my flat ribbon pieces all cut out here. Also have a couple short pieces of the 38 gauge that I'm going to use for binding for the stacked ribbons. Got my 8 pieces here cut, stacked flat, kept straight. So basically how I do it is, you might be surprised how these ribbons kind of want to stack themselves when you bundle them together. Basically I just use 2 fingers at 2 different ways like this, just like that. They end up stacked. I mean, they don't just end up that way, but what I do once I get them stacked is, for this first end, pinch them tight, and then I'm going to take the short piece of 38 gauge, and I'm just going to use it, wrap it by hand around this end a bunch of times, which is going to keep this end in position and keep this end stacked. You don't have to worry about that end yet, that free end. Focus on this one end, get it stacked properly. Wrap it, 10, 15 times, cut off your slack. So then what you have is this. And then from there, what I do is work down, because this is going to stay where it's at. It actually stays pretty good just with that 38 gauge wrap. And then you can just work from the spot that you know is right and kind of slide your fingers down, and it just kind of stays stacked. A couple ways that I've seen to do that too. You can lick your fingers, or you can use water to wet the ribbons a little bit. Helps them stay together. Basically what you want to do is you want to make sure they stay stacked all the way down to this end. You want to get the end just like you did the first end. You want the slack. You want to take all the slack out of all these ribbons. Basically get down to a point where you know it's stacked down here and you got fairly even slack throughout them. And then what you're going to do is, same thing on the other end. Take the 38 gauge and wrap just by hand around the stack. 10 times as good. It stays pretty well. So then what you have is that. Sometimes, depending on how well they stack the very first time, find a spot in the middle, and I'll do the same thing. I'll go ahead and bind them in the middle at one spot, just like I did both ends. Make sure the slack's all pulled out. Now this one I do in the middle, I'll get it good and tight, but I'm only going to go like 5 or 6 times because I want to be able to slide that down. I want to be able to slide that binding up and down the stack. So basically that's finished prepped stacked ribbon. Binded both ends and once lightly in the center. I'm gonna set that aside. Put that aside for now.
Now this 26 Nichrome-80, the frame, so usually what I do is by hand, I'll measure out 2 pieces, 1 for each side. You want an equal length as a ribbon. So cut that piece. I always straighten the frames, and I do that by twisting a single strand with the drill. Just put the 26 in the drill, give it 5 seconds or so with the twist of the drill. So you want it super straight. For these type of builds, all the prep work are super important. If there's anything you want to pay attention to is the prep, because once you get all these stuff all prepped, pretty easy breezy from there if you're familiar with standard Claptons. So I got 1 piece there and a second piece there, and those will be our frames. So what I'm going to do from this point is, basically I'm going to manipulate each frame.
Basically these frames are going to be on either side of the stacked ribbon. You want the ribbon, when wrapped, to be vertical. So you don't want to wrap it this way on the bit, you want it to be this way. So you're going to actually wrap the ribbon vertical like this. The 26 gauge frames are going to be on the flat side of the stack.
Into position, and you start it from one end. Basically I'm going to manipulate each frame. Just like you did it with the stacking ribbon, we're just going to focus on one end first and get it into place by hand. This is what you're looking for. See how the flat ribbons are stacked up on top of each other and the 26 gauge on the sides sandwiching the flat ribbons, and we're going to do the same thing by grabbing a piece of 38 gauge and binding it together. And there you have the 26 gauge as your outside frame binding together with the flat ribbon.
We've got one side wrapped. So the stacked ribbon is wrapped individually, and then we also have 26 gauge frames added and then wrapped again. So this is where it's good to have that piece of wire that's in the center of the ribbon able to move a little bit, because I can just slide it down to the end as I bind. Basically what I'm going to do is I'll go and see how it stays nice and flat like that now. I got the stacked ribbon in the center, I got the frames where they're supposed to be, and the slack is perfectly even. It's not bowed or it's not crooked at all. I'm going to go down to the center right about where I'm at. I'm going to do the same thing, except I'm wrapping around everything this time, not just the ribbon. I'm wrapping around the frames also. I'm gonna go 5 or 6 times, semi-loose, because this, you wanna be able to slide this also. Sort of a temporary binding in the center. And then I'm gonna slide the binding that's on the ribbon only down to the end, and then I'm gonna rebind the very end. Actually, what I do at this point a lot of times too, I'm gonna cut the ribbon. So the ends of the ribbon are free now. I'll go from the center all the way down to the end. But I leave the frames longer because I'm thinking ahead, and I'm going to use the frames attached to the swivel. Because the ribbon is weird. As soon as you bend the end of the ribbon or try and twist the end of the ribbon around the swivel, you'll get weird slack back in here. It happens to me every single time. So I always cut the ribbons short and I use the frames to anchor to the perfect slack here. The ribbons aren't bowing, the frames aren't bowing, which is key. Because if you get halfway down this Clapton and you have weird slack in here, you got one piece of ribbon that wants to bow out, it's a nightmare. It's really a nightmare, and at this point we spent a lot of time doing this, right? We don't want to start over. We don't want to have to go backwards at all. If it's not working out at this point, stop and do what it takes to get it to work. So I'm to the end, I'm gonna do the same thing. And I can go kind of tight here because I'm pretty confident that everything behind here is nice and tight and where it needs to be. It's gonna stay where it's at until the end. So we're gonna secure our end into the drill, the end we started with, straight in the center, as center as possible. You don't want this thing wobbling. Now I'm going to use the 2 cores, the 2 frames that I left long to secure to the swivel. Nothing special there either. It just goes through the swivel. Doesn't need anything extreme. That'll stay just fine. Everything's still nice in line. It's about as good as the prep's going to get right there.
And then we're going to grab our 38 gauge. Now, I normally Clapton straight off the spool. You really can secure it on the side however you want. I kind of just stick it in the gap and press it very softly for it to twist a couple times, and when it starts wrapping a couple times, if you need to during this process, you could kind of run your fingers up the cores, make sure it's all flat. So usually what I'll do in the beginning, I'll start off nice and slow. So you want to make sure that the frames are secured, and I'm putting very little tension here this way as possible. You kind of want it to flow on. You don't want to cause those cords to roll from the side up, top of the stack, or ribbon. You want them to stay out where they're at on the sides. So as little as pressure as possible is the best.
So I'll go about that far, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to check. It's hard to see without looking close, so I'll check, and I want to make sure that the frames are staying on the sides of the ribbon. Lots of times what I'll do is I'll take my nylons like this, as once we get, you know, a ½ inch or so, I'll just use them to, not too hard, but lightly squeeze the set back flat in case frames are wanting to wander up on top of the stack instead of staying where they should be on the sides. And usually 1 or 2 good squeezes get them back where they need to be.
And then from there it's easy peasy. Never go too fast. And then I'll stop and check once in a while, make sure everything stays where it should be.
So what happens sometimes, especially with 38 gauge, is it'll wrap backwards on itself. Ideally that doesn't happen, but if it does, you can back up. Back up a couple wraps and restart, no big deal.
Once you feel it's nice and tight where it should be, then you can go ahead and speed up, if you feel comfortable.
Good rule of thumb too, when you're claptoning like this, I clapton straight off the spool, it's just what I've gotten used to, is a 90-degree angle. You basically, 90-degree angle or slightly less. You don't want to lead this at all, especially with 38 gauge, because you'll get that spaced. You want tight claptons, core wire here, feed wire 90 degrees. I made it up to the point where I have my binding in the center. This is where that movable binding becomes super nice. You can kind of just slide it down out of the way. So we got this wire. We're gonna go 4 wrap duals on the Twisted Messes RDA 1/8 ID. You just wrap like any other coil. I'll show you a couple tricks that I use for the install. We're gonna go 4 wraps. I go over the top. There's 2, 3, 4. I always go past and stop like that at a 90. Give yourself ½ inch. Just one. I'll bend this lead down, so basically what you have is that angle. And then I'll just take this lead, which is going to be our outside lead, facing outside the deck, and I'll bend it forward. I'll just give it a 90-degree bend, so what you end up with is this. That way, instead of having one lead up here, one down here, you kind of have more level profile, right? So they both go straight into the posts.
So it looks like we're clearing good. Clearing all the walls is definitely what you want to check. This Addy has plenty of room, so we're not going to have any issues with that. So pulse out just like any other build. Be super careful at first. Sometimes this 38 gauge, it will melt if you're not careful. Especially in the beginning when you're getting hot spots, basically a short.
On the inside there, I think we got a lead sticking through. A couple little pinches. Some cool color with the Nichrome. More pinches.
Check your screws a couple times. Through the pulse process, sometimes the wire expands and contracts when it heats up and your screws loosens up in a bit. So always check about halfway through and towards the end. This little wiggle maneuver helps too. Little movements between wraps. Good oxidation on the Nichrome.
On the dot. Got it. I usually just cut. This is just regular Japanese cotton. Some people pull the front sheet off and use the center, or it doesn't really matter. I just use the whole sheet. I found with these frame staples and staple variations that you can go a little bit tighter with the wick because the wire holds so much juice. Still not too tight enough. It's just something you have to get a feel for. Use probably a little bit less wick. That's just a personal preference thing. Usually just tuck straight under. Go. Nice. Okay, we're gonna juice her down. It's Atomic Clouds Awakening, 6 milligram. Blowing it out here right now. And over time it just collapses the wick, so I just kind of let it do its thing. Cotton's pretty good at soaking up juice all by itself, so I just go slow, and then I'll definitely just like warm it up a tiny bit, not just full on go for it, you know. There you go, buddy. Oh, be my guess.
Special thanks to Tommy Cole for this awesome build. He's a really cool guy. You can follow him on his Instagram, which is tcole78. Don't forget to like and subscribe, guys. If you guys want, you can stick around and watch some tutorials. Did I say that right? Tutorials. Or you can stick around and watch some vape tricks. We also got skit and games, and I think some vape juice that plays music. As you can see, there's like some Mortal Kombat or something going on there. But yeah, just pick something. I got time. Alright, okay.